Trump's statement from this 2-day meeting with Netanyahu on the 4th February and on the 5th February are so shocking and so surreal, it's really difficult to interpret them. And to my mind, you know, I very much doubt that he actually means what he's saying here, because it's almost too stupid. He can't possibly. And the reason why I think this is because it's not like the United States is this flawless perfection. So you have nothing to do at home. So, let's go make the rest of the world better, and let's start with Gaza and make that place beautiful. He might actually believe when he says that people of Gaza are going back to Gaza because they have nowhere else to go and they don't know where else they could go. I think that maybe he does believe that, but I think that one thing that people in the new world view very differently from people in the old world is that in the new world, people mostly feel nothing and think nothing of, packing up their entire life, uprooting themselves, and moving to a different part of the country because maybe they got a new job or the climate is better or something else. People like the Palestinians in Gaza, and I think you could say that for most of at the very least, the Mediterranean culture where I also grew up, they are kind of rooted to the land. The being in a certain location means something. They know how to till that land. They don't know how to fish those waters. They don't know how to hunt the grounds. The sounds, the smells, the light is familiar. It feels like home, and they have generational continuity, multi-generational continuity. You have these communities where not only do people know each other in between themselves, they know whose grandfather was, who's did what and went where, and so there's a much more much deeper and more stronger sense of the community, and it is definitely tied to the land. So the new world idea that if you build somebody a comfortable condo with a jacuzzi, that they will just say like, hey, I'm out of here, I'm going to go and live there. That's not exactly it. But the whole thing of him asserting that the United States will take ownership of Gaza, which with that statement he made a day after the video that you just showed, I think that just took everybody by surprise. That just shocked the whole world, because it's so out there that it's very, very difficult to believe that he said that even. And
he repeated, Alex, he repeated the same type of argument on his post on his social media. Yeah.
Yes. But I would, the only way I can imagine that such an idea even came about is that if Trump and his team sat around, had a brainstorming session, and they talked, how do we solve Gaza? And then somebody said, hey, boss, why don't we take ownership of it? It's a nice area, sunny. We could build hotels and golf courses. And, it has about 11 billion cubic feet of natural gas reserves offshore. Yeah, it's not big, but it's, between $4 and $5 billion big. So, it could work out. An idea, an off-the-wall idea. But if you consider it as a chess move, let's see what that could do as a geopolitical chess move. If Donald Trump makes that assertion, and he, by all indications, he's dead serious about this, what does that do to the super hawks in Israel who want to go back to war in Gaza as soon as they, as soon as Hamas releases the last hostage? What does that do to them? How do they justify sending Israeli soldiers there to fight and be maimed and die if the United States has already claimed that land? And then the Israeli settlers who, assumed that they had sovereign right to this land because God gave them that land. Well, now that Donald Trump is claiming it, what does that mean? That that changes the equation a lot. I think it forces a reassessment of the relations between United States and Israel. And I would also say that contrary to what many people, because I've seen that many even very, very learned analysts have had to kind of look at the body language for clues about what all this means. You know, they observe Benjamin Netanyahu, but you know, the opinions vary very sharply, and I think that, you know, many people say that, oh, look at Netanyahu, he's looking smug and self-assured, and he's the boss there. He's got the whole thing under control. Trump is simply, you know, dancing to Netanyahu's tune. I didn't see the conference on the 4th that way. I saw Netanyahu looking very sheepish and smiling stupidly as he looks around the room. And as you know, if somebody showed me that footage without me knowing anything about any of these two people, and they asked me who's the alpha male, I would say it's the guy talking, obviously. And the sheepish guy, he's the supplicant. That's what it looks like to me. So, you know, I don't see it quite as Netanyahu being in charge and Trump just doing Netanyahu's bidding. And then in the conference on the 5th, I think that Netanyahu was stumped as everybody else. That I'm not even sure that he knew what was coming. And I think that this whole idea about owning Gaza, the United States coming in there and owning Gaza, is a geopolitical chess move. I think it doesn't stand a snowball's chance in hell of succeeding, because you didn't clear this with the regional hegemons, did you? Turkey and Iran. You're in a hostile neighborhood where religious, tribal, sectarian power equations are so complicated that even the British a century ago decided to seed the area with what they called a fiercely patriotic stock, a fiercely patriotic race. You know, this was this was a statement by one of the alumni of the Milner's Kindergarten, the Round Table in London, when they were preparing to create Israel as a beachhead for control of the Middle East. And they actually said that the only way that Great Britain remains a maritime empire, that was the statement given to Manchester Guardian at some point in 1915. They said the only way that the Great Britain remains a maritime empire is if we seed this region with a particularly fiercely patriotic race. And then 2 years later, we get the Balfour Declaration that was issued by Arthur Balfour to Lord Walter Rothschild, who was the father of Nathan Rothschild, who was the best friend of Arthur Balfour. So this wasn't about creating a homeland for the long-suffering Jewish people. This was the empire creating a beachhead in the Eastern Mediterranean and using the Jews cynically as that fiercely patriotic race so that they could do the empire's bidding there, keep the region destabilized, so that the empire could control the flow of resources through that region. So now, if the British Empire, close to the zenith of their power, had to create this very complicated arrangement to make sure that they could assert their hegemony, what would make Trump think that he can do it with, waiters, receptionists, and golf course attendants? It would require a very, very major security arrangement and a very expensive security arrangement. And that security arrangement could probably outweigh the cost. The cost of that arrangement would probably outweigh any benefit. And to imagine that Trump and his team are so simple-minded that they don't see this, to me, is unrealistic. They must see this. They must understand this. And so for that reason, I believe that Trump made a geopolitical chess move. He doesn't mean a word of what he's saying. That is, he might go through it up to a point where it becomes obvious that he can't go through with it, or when it becomes opportune to drop the project. At the moment, we have to also understand that at home, there's a very major political bloc consisting of Jewish Zionists and the Christian evangelicals. And I think that Trump probably can't afford to make that bloc into his political enemies barely 3 weeks into his presidency. So I think it's a geopolitical chess move and a distraction at home, because he's also doing big moves against the deep state, against the swamp at home. And so maybe, this is one of those illusionist trick where you say like, hey, look what this hand is doing while you're doing something important with the other hand. So that's how I see what happened during Netanyahu's visit, because the alternative interpretation would be that Trump and his team are stupid and delusional. And I don't quite see them that way. I don't think they are stupid and delusional.
And looking at the bigger picture, the other controversial argument on his part was the new nuclear deal with Iran. And he was talking, and Netanyahu they were sitting next to each other, and Donald Trump was talking about a nuclear deal between Iran and the United States. And you feel that Netanyahu is not that comfortable about what Donald Trump is talking about. Here comes the question: how Donald Trump was responsible. He has decided to withdraw from JCPOA in his first term, and right now he's talking about the nuclear deal between Iran and the United States. What has changed since then that he's now interested in that sort of talk? And let me just mention another point, that one of the reporters was asking him that Iran is weaker, Iran has been defeated in Syria, in Lebanon, and militarily is weaker. And Donald Trump said, I appreciate what you're talking about, but Iran is stronger. Here, this is what he said when Netanyahu was just close to him and sitting next to him. What does that mean in your opinion?
Well, you see, this also proves to me that the Trump and I it's always necessary to say it's not just him. He has advisors. That Trump and his people are actually very well informed about the situation, and that a lot of what he's saying in public is a distraction and trolling, and perhaps subversion of his political adversaries at home. So yes, what has changed is that Iran is in a much stronger position. Not only have we seen these attack exchanges between Iran and Israel, in which Iran very clearly showed that they can strike Israel at will, with precision strike that Israel cannot defend against, and they have also shown that they can disable any attacks coming from Israel. And then the strategic power balance has changed radically, because in the meantime, the Chinese have designated Iran as the pivot of their security architecture for Western Asia. They have signed a comprehensive strategic cooperation agreement. A similar agreement was signed very recently with Russia, just before Trump became president. So Iran has two very powerful allies in the region. So military balance it's now clear that Iran has the, if you want to call it, escalatory dominance in the region. They're the most powerful military force in the region. The alliances with Russia and China strengthen Iran's position further. The fact that Iran has managed to reestablish diplomatic relationship with Saudi Arabia and that they're no longer enemies further reinforces Iran's position. While at the same time, Israel, is now besieged by war on 5 sides. They have overstretched themselves in Syria, in Gaza, in Lebanon. They have been targeted by Ansar Allah from Yemen. Ansar Allah has shown that they can disrupt maritime traffic through the Red Sea and a chunk of the Mediterranean. The Russian forces are now have a strong presence in the region, not just in Syria, but also in Libya, and also American alliance with Turkey is now really on the rocks. They are practically on hostile terms, and the Turks are now poised to deal with the Kurds, which are an important ally of the United States in the region. So it's a huge mess. It's a huge mess, and the United States can barely cope with it. I think that this huge mess was actually deliberately cooked up for Trump by the Biden administration. But nevertheless, this is the reality on the ground. And it's going to be very difficult for Trump to deal with it. And so I think that having a positive and friendly relation reestablished with the Turks and reestablishing diplomatic relations. No, not Turks. I'm sorry, Iranians. Is probably a big plus for the Trump administration. One big worry less, and let's say that it gives them a way to negotiate their position in the Middle East rather than being thrown out altogether.
The American troops in Syria. Donald Trump wanted to withdraw American forces from Syria in his first term. That we know that his administration was against him. They didn't let him to do that. Right now, again, they're talking about this. Syria, we know that there are American forces in Syria, in Iraq, but right now they're talking about Syria. How is that going to show the Donald Trump's vision, the Donald Trump's sort of understanding of the region? Is that gonna, the situation in Syria, what has happened in Syria recently, would facilitate his sort of opinion of withdrawing the troops from Syria?
Yeah, I do believe so. It's clear that they have now maybe this was a decision of the previous administration, but they have decided to create a fallback position in Lebanon because many in the American foreign policy establishment kind of expect that Israel doesn't have a future, and they treated Israel as their unsinkable aircraft carrier in the region. And so if Israel crashes and burns, then they're now pulling back to Lebanon, and they are building this multi-billion-dollar embassy. I think that a pullout from Syria is something that Trump is going to do, and I think that the mess that the Biden administration has created this deliberately will probably give them a credible pretext to do that, because Syria now is almost ungovernable. This wasn't meant to happen. I mean, when the Turks and the HTS and I guess with the cooperation of the Americans and the French and the British launched the incursion from Idlib, they thought they were just going to fight Syrian government forces, that they were going to weaken the regime and then regime change, but keep the structures of government in Syria intact and then wrest control of them. And that way they would get control of Syria. What they have now is they have the country that they have to manage themselves, and they were never prepared for that. And they don't have sufficient military personnel to do that. And then something like a third of all these HTS people are foreigners. They have no legitimacy. They're not welcome in Syria, even by people who might have been enemies of the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria. So you don't even stand the chance of pacifying this region and keeping it under control. And the American troops there are certainly insufficient. And so, and then, you know, the Free Syrian Army or Syrian Democratic Forces, I forget what they're called now, but the American proxy there, they're not necessarily on good term with HTS, who are under Turkish control. So there's a chance that a civil war breaks out between them. And then, you know, in Lebanon, they didn't eliminate Hezbollah as a force to reckon with, and they were hoping to trigger a civil war in Lebanon, but that hasn't happened because I think that Hezbollah was prepared for this, and they took precautions. So nothing is going terribly well there, and I think that an orderly withdrawal with maybe keeping your footprint there, foot in the door in Lebanon, might probably be the low-cost solution for the Middle East for Trump administration.
Alex, do you think that in Saudi Arabia, if Donald Trump, let's assume that Donald Trump goes with the plan of sending these people to Jordan and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, all the Arab states, even Jordan was talking about that, they're not accepting that. Do you think that Donald Trump, to what extent he's able to put pressure on them, on Saudi Arabia, for example?
I think I actually believe that there's not very much that he can do in that sense, because politically it's too difficult for Jordan and for Egypt to accept the Palestinians. Even if you could talk King Abdullah and General Sisi to say, like, okay, you know, we don't want any trouble with you guys. We need the money to keep coming in. We'll do it. Well, there's a good chance that would actually be the end of their regimes, that King Abdullah will get overthrown and General Sisi also could get overthrown. So that wouldn't necessarily be a winning move. Not to mention that's you know, what did Trump say, between 1.7 and 1.8 million people? How do you force them out of Gaza if they don't want to go? You know, we're not talking about a village, a few hundred people or a few thousand people. We're not talking about Diego Garcia that you can, you know, blockade and then force people off the island. We're talking about Gaza Strip and a large population that doesn't want to go. It's, to my mind, it is impossible. It is just an impossible thing. And I do actually believe that Trump doesn't want Israel to go back to bombing Gaza. I understand that he delivered more 2,000-pound bombs to them, but I wonder if there weren't strings attached to say, you will not drop this on civilian populations. We'll find out. But I do actually think that he sincerely doesn't want genocide to continue on his watch. And if Israelis don't bomb, if Americans or Israelis or the Brits or NATO or somebody doesn't carpet bomb Gaza, you will not be able to get the Gazan people out of there. And so I don't think anything comes from this whole boondoggle.
It seems to me the founder, I don't know if you saw the interview with the founder of DeepSeek, he said that it's time for us to lead the world in terms of technology. This is a new era they're talking about. And Donald Trump has to consider what's going on in reality, on the ground, in terms of technology, in terms of the changes, huge changes that are happening. We can say that we are living a watershed moment in terms of these changes that are happening. But in my opinion, Donald Trump is trying to simplify the situation in the Middle East and in Ukraine in order to solve the problem. Because his bigger picture is not about the Middle East, it's not about Ukraine, it's about something bigger than that. How is that, in your opinion?
Okay, so when we're talking about the technological lead by China, that's already a fact. You know, there's this Australian strategic ASPI, Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and they track the development of 64 key technologies in the world, and then they rank nations according to, you know, how well advanced they are in these 64 technologies. You know, how many patents, how many peer-reviewed papers are published, how many firms and institutes are involved, and so forth. And so in 2007, out of these 64 key technology areas, China was the world leader in only 3. And the United States was the world leader in 60 of them. Today, barely 18 years later, China is the leader in 57 of these 64 technologies, and the United States in only 7 of them. So there's been a complete inversion. So China already is the global technology leader, which is the objective that the Chinese government set for themselves in their 2000 strategic development policy paper. So that already happened. That train already left the station. Trump's geopolitical policy, I tend to agree with you. He wants to simplify things. I think that he perceives his key battles to be at home, because there's a reason why the United States is losing out and falling behind in technology development and innovations. Because practically wherever you look, you see that technology development is suffocated by the need to create these monopolies that are only reserved to the oligarchy. So, you know, when Mark Andreessen wanted to go into AI because he felt that AI was a very promising new industry, they told him, no, don't do that, because we want only 3 companies to dominate there. And if you look at the development of high-speed railways, you see the hand of the oligarchy, and they're suffocating the developments. And while the Chinese built 38,000 kilometers of high-speed railways in 20 years, the United States hasn't built 120 miles of it, you know, and the cost is something like 1,000-fold between how much it costs. And then, you know, the automotive industry, the car production, the Chinese were 1% of the market 20 years ago. Today, they are 39% of the global market in car manufacturing, all taken from Western and Japanese car manufacturers. And so it's one thing after another. And at the same time, the cost of maintaining the empire is destroying, it's bankrupting the United States. So I think that Trump's priorities should be very clear. You want to disentangle yourself from all these imperial misadventures, not just in the Middle East, but also in Ukraine, in the Far East. And I think that you want to clean up the corruption at home, which is what's suffocating your economic development, and you have to put the country's development on practically on a new foundation. And I think that this is what he's doing. All this, you know, everything that you hear from Elon Musk is kind of a foreshadowing of what they're going to do next. And you see that they're going very hard against USA, against FBI, against possibly against the IRS next. And the entanglements with Israel, in the Middle East, in Gaza, in Syria, in Ukraine, in Europe, are all a massive distraction, a massive drain on resources, on people, on capital. And it seems to me that what Trump is doing is very likely resetting the United States completely back to its Republican roots. Maybe I'm a bit too optimistic, but I do believe that he's doing that, and we shouldn't expect that he will come out and say this explicitly. He simply cannot. He cannot. He has a lot of political enemies at home, and a lot of them get disenfranchised as all these changes go into effect. And we already see how all the beneficiaries of US aid are now reacting hysterically by them cutting the funds from US aid. And this is just one of the first battles. There's a lot more that's coming down the road.
And one of the organizations that you mentioned is USAID. And how the way that Elon Musk is picturing this organization is the far left organization. But we know that the far left is not globalist, the far right, because these terms doesn't make sense anymore.
It doesn't.
We can say globalists are behind these sort of organizations. Here comes the question, Alex. You see Fico, who is a left-wing president in Europe, talking about they wanted to overthrow him. They wanted to make a color revolution in Slovakia. He was specifically talking about USAID. And many color revolutions have happened during many years by this organization. And what does it mean right now, Donald Trump bringing, changing the organization, bring it under the control of the State Department? How is that going to work out for Rubio and the way that he's thinking about the South America, about Cuba? Are they going to do the same thing in Cuba, in Venezuela? These are huge doubts on the part of the people in Latin America.
Yes, for sure. But I think that there is some likelihood that Trump's administration and the subsequent administration will focus on being the dominant power in their hemisphere, meaning North America, South America, that region, and that means that very probably pressure on places like Cuba and Venezuela and Colombia and Peru are down the road. So how will all this work out? I don't know, but I think that inevitably we have to move towards a new and different world order. And a few days ago, when Trump was saying how he loved the Russian people and he's going to make them a big favor by helping them end the war in Ukraine, and that's going to be his gift on 9th of May, whatever he said there. Then Vladimir Putin responded in an interview after that, and he said, basically, yeah, that's very welcome. We should be friends, and that's all good. But we should talk bigger things. Vladimir Putin kind of made it clear that the discussion between the United States and Russia should be about bigger arrangements than just Ukraine. And so here, we have to kind of use our imagination because nobody's spelling it out. But I believe that we could see the world evolve to a new security architecture that might be divided between 3 or 4 major regions dominated by let's call it a regional power. So maybe the continental Europe dominated by Russia, East Asia dominated by China, West Asia dominated by Iran, or Iran and Turkey, and then the Western Hemisphere dominated by the United States. There will have to be an agreement about exactly what does that mean to dominate these countries, because you will have, you can't go back to the 18th century gunboat diplomacy and colonialism again. That would be a wasted opportunity. But I think that this is definitely a possibility, and it's not that unprecedented, because the British Empire has been for over a century obsessed with this, 3-block world architecture, and I think, I'm pretty sure that this is why the Trilateral Commission is called the Trilateral Commission, and the British vision, which they actually, I think it was Lord Halifax actually communicated this vision explicitly to Hitler at the beginning of World War II, when the Brits were trying to set up Germany as the European hegemon. The idea was that, Germany would dominate Central and Eastern Europe in partnership with Britain, and then the United States would dominate the North Atlantic area in partnership with Britain, and then Japan would dominate East Asia in partnership with Britain. So Britain saw this 3-block world as the future of global, security architecture, perhaps, but they saw themselves at the center of everything. And all the same, the vision is coherent to a certain extent. So it wouldn't be inconceivable that between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, the 3 great powers don't move in that direction. Obviously, not in the same format as the British Empire, but in a different format. Nevertheless, taking into account these 3 large blocks, and maybe a 4th one, again, Iran in Western Asia, and who knows, maybe Brazil, having a regional dominance in South America. I don't know, but something along those lines. And this vision isn't necessarily inconsistent with multipolar integrations and the BRICS organization, the principles of the BRICS organization. And then, we did have Marco Rubio, of all people, recently say, hey, the unipolar world order is over. We are going into a multipolar future. So maybe this is already being discussed. And as I heard this morning, Trump said that the peace talks with Russia are already well advanced. And, we don't know that there was a call between Trump and Putin. So I think this implies that there are, back channel communications that are, maybe they're hacking out an agreement that at some point, maybe Trump and Putin will meet and sign together. That'll be the end of the Project Ukraine.
I think to understand the behavior of Donald Trump in terms of what's going on in the Middle East and Ukraine, look at what he said about Ukraine and Russia. Russia is weaker. Russia has lost 1 million soldiers, and all of that we know that they were not. This sort of argument doesn't have any sort of meaning when it comes to the reality of what's going on in Ukraine. But he said those things. I would wonder what was happening in the mind of Netanyahu when Donald Trump was talking about removing all of these people who were fighting Israel for more than 15 months, and they didn't leave Gaza. They're living there in those buildings, no longer buildings, those in the rubble. But do you think when Netanyahu looks at Donald Trump, he sees the same sort of rhetoric on his part in order to, as you mentioned, to bring down the tensions?
I'm sorry, Nima, I didn't understand the question.
To bring down the question would be, Netanyahu was looking at Donald Trump and he's making new arguments about Gaza, which was not possible by any measure, as you mentioned. And knowing what Donald Trump said about Ukraine, which didn't have anything to do with the reality, And here, repeating the same sort of rhetoric about Gaza, would that bring any sort of hope? Because right after this sort of argument, Smotrich, who was going to leave the government, he said, I'm going to be part of this government, I'm going to be supporting Netanyahu. And here comes, there is a complexity in what's going on.
Yeah.
In terms of internal policy of Israel, the external policy of the United States, and all of that together, and the way that Donald Trump is talking about. Do you think, I would wonder what was happening in the mind of Netanyahu when he was talking this way about Gaza? Because in one part he said that the way that Donald Trump is talking about Gaza is for the next many years to come. I don't see that. Even Netanyahu doesn't believe what Donald Trump is talking about. He's the most delusional leader right now on earth, and he's not believing what Donald Trump is talking about.
Yeah, I think that Netanyahu's first obsession is survival, and so I think that he has to walk away from this meeting with Trump pretending that he has Trump's absolute support, the absolute support of the United States, and that whatever Trump is saying with regards to the American commitment to Israel is the real deal. And that he's coming back home with gifts, with reassurances of support. Well, Trump said like our relationship is unshakable and forever and ever and ever. And I know that people in the American administration don't even believe that because, as I think I've mentioned this before, Henry Kissinger himself in 2012 said that there wouldn't be Israel in 10 years, that it was finished, that it was imploding. So this is not something that everybody else doesn't understand. Many people understand this. And many people believe that Israel has been strategically defeated. So I very much doubt that, Trump is not privy to this information or people around him. Nevertheless, Netanyahu is caught in that, and he's caught in something, in a political arena which is on the brink of a civil war, where things could get extremely ugly, where he is quite likely to end up in prison, and he's already in a poor state of health. His family is, pretty much abandoned him by all appearances. And he's isolated now, and he needs how do you call it? When you're drowning and they throw you he needs to save himself. He needs to rescue himself somehow. And I think it's hardly possible to deny that Israel has been defeated now. Hamas is still there. They look like they're more stronger than they were when the war started. Hezbollah is still there. Their misadventure in Syria is now looking more and more like they walked into a trap. There's no good news coming from anywhere. So to return from Washington and to show that you're coming back with trophies is what gives Netanyahu a little more political life. And then, let's not forget how volatile this is, because when was it that Damascus fell? That was 8th December 2024. So that's not even 2 months ago, right? It's going to be 2 months in 2 days. When Damascus fell, Benjamin Netanyahu seemed bulletproof. He was triumphant. Israel was in this celebration frenzy of like, what a brilliant victory. They took care of Bashar al-Assad. They defeated. They just defeated everybody. They were, and Iran was next. And they seemed they were really kind of drunk on delusion. And only 2 months later, here he is, Benjamin Netanyahu, teetering on the verge of his end, his political end. So I think that this is how I see the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, and I think that Trump, out of let's say for domestic political considerations, cannot be overtly hostile to Benjamin Netanyahu, again because of the Christian evangelical and Zionist Jewish voting bloc, and the many powerful people in that voting bloc. So he has to play geopolitical chess, and I think that what happened this week in Washington has been exactly geopolitical chess. But we'll find out in time. I know that practically every analyst that I try to listen to about this is, we're in uncharted waters. They're not sure how to interpret that. Almost everybody was trying to read Netanyahu's body language to try to find answers. And so for sure, there's going to be surprise, but the situation is far from clear. So, that would be my explanations as far as my imagination goes.